General Order 3 for the Starfleet is the sovereignty of each Federation member being respected in all things. Starfleet personnel shall observe any and all statutes, laws, ordinances, and rules of government currently in effect within the jurisdiction of a member planet. Violators of such ordinances will be subject to such punishments or corrections as shall be determined by the local governmental bodies. Isn't that an interesting bit to think about it for a minute? One of the things that's prominent in the Federation is that the Federation as a whole, its individual member states, respect each individual member and their rights to self-governance, as well as having their own culture and morals and rules and laws that pertain to their beliefs. Adhere to as long as the member state agrees to the statutes of the Federation, the Articles of Federation per se. So, we don't have one monolithic central government-based system where everybody follows the party line, so to speak. You don't have this all-reaching, all-encompassing government or political body. As much as it's portrayed to the exterior, to forces outside, that the Federation is one big starfaring nation, it's actually a collage of many nations working together for the common good. Now, I've heard arguments over the years of my life that in some aspects that's how the states work within the United States, but that's not necessarily true. Not since the 1860s. Before the 1860s, the states had a lot more autonomy and a lot more say in governing their own system. You had a lot wider range of different yet similar political and or moral beliefs. After the Civil War, things changed and we became a federalized country, a federal country, where it's still made up of individual states, but the states' individuality diminished. The fact that Iowa can't just tomorrow just make a vote and secede from the Union. There's plenty of people who argue that that's how that works, but that's not necessarily true. In the Federation, that's exactly what that means. So if Vulcan decides at some point it no longer can agree to the Articles of Federation, that they are free to dissolve themselves from the Federation and go their own way. That General Order number 3 gives a general order, or I don't want to call it a tenet, but it establishes the protocol for all members of Starfleet in reference to dealing with the individual member states and their cultures. So if you go to Bajor, you go to Rylos and you run afoul of the local laws, you're going to be punished and held accountable by the local government with the approval of both Starfleet and the Federation. You understood that you're going to a foreign country, so to speak, or a different world with different values, and you should comport yourself appropriate to the world and its values and its morals, not to your own world or to some greater federal entity such as the Federation. This can be a challenge if you think about it. The topic comes up quite often about how Star Trek is not unlike Star Wars, that the seemingly dominant racial type within the Federation borders is humanity, is humans. We see far more humans in Starfleet. We see far more humans being interacted with, and not the other way around. Well, this is to suggest that the humanity is very prolific, but I think there's another angle here. I think, in part, because it's human nature to want to be curious, to want to explore the unknown, want to do things and strive for something better or greater than themselves, whether they acknowledge it or not, whether we acknowledge that or not. I think there's a reason that you see a large predominant number of humans serving in Starfleet. In part is because back home on Earth, everything's taken care of. You do have a modern social state, although I will argue that it's wrong to put modern day or past moral or societal political ideologies and titles onto something that's 100 years or 200 years in the future, which may or may not be anything like what we think it should be. I know what we think we see in the TV series, but in reality I don't think it's quite the same. And here I'll give you a small argument on that. If you're a history of American politics, a student of American politics or American history, you go back about 100 years, 120 years, when the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were still in full swing. This is before after they've changed, became what we think we know that they are now. The actual mental or actual dogma behind both parties was the opposite of what they are now. So in reality, everything that the Republican Party pushes for now, the Democratic Party did 120 years ago, 100 years ago. Everything that the Democratic Party holds today is where the Republicans were 100 years ago. I don't make that up. I read it. I looked it up. I studied that stuff years ago, and that's the way it worked. Everything's reversed from what it was 100 plus years ago. Not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just shows that things change. So putting anything that we do today as in our political ideology onto something that's going to take place hundreds of years from now with a completely different set of cultural moral values is wrong. I mean, if you look at the history, Earth was still recovering from the Third World War and the eugenics war. The planet was pretty heavily devastated, even while it was expanding. The fact that the Vulcans, the Andorians, the Tellarites even accepted Earth as a founding member of the Federation is more due to the outward drive of humanity itself than the condition or resources or contributions that Earth was going to give to the Federation. Earth was in bad shape. It was recovering, but recovering is still bad shape. It's not prominent. So, what we see here back on the Federation, or on Earth, is there's no longer a need for most blue-collar workers, if you will. The farmers farm because they want to. Majority of the farms are probably automated or becoming automated, increasingly automated. They're going to produce bulk materials for the replicators. They're going to produce. There's going to be truck farms. There's going to be small, limited farms that produce specialized fruits and vegetables for human consumption, because that is how humans consume things, and always will. There'll always be a demand for that kind of fresh produce, fresh food, fresh product. But in reality, I think you'd see a diminished amount of things like cows and pigs, because they're going to have protein block supplements that are fed into replicators that then replicate the proteins and the flavors and tastes of what we know as steak and bacon and so on and so, which from a practical standpoint makes more sense, because it takes an awful lot of vegetation to feed one cow. So that steak took a lot of bread, literally, to get it to where it's worth eating. And in the industry side of things, you're going to see that the population of the planet no longer needs to be a central cog in a vast machine of manufacturing stuff, because most things are going to be assembled. The replicators are going to replicate all the components necessary, or majority of the components that can be replicated, and then they'll be assembled. So this is where you see technicians. Your white collar jobs become the dominant sort of job, and the technician is going to be somebody who has a talent for this sort of thing, and or a desire to do something simplistic. They don't want an overly complicated career. They don't want an overly complicated job. They're okay with going home every day, having a job that gives them personal satisfaction and value and a sense of self-worth, and then going home, potentially teleporting across the planet or even to the moon perhaps and back, as they telecommute, if you will, to spend the rest of their day with their family. And their work days are probably much less than what we would consider acceptable today. It wouldn't be unreasonable for somebody to work 4 hours in an assembly plant, putting together the components, or directing machinery to put together the components of whatever it is they're manufacturing. So if we're manufacturing an agricultural device, which in reality, how much of that would you necessarily need? I mean, Rob Gustafson hit on some points that really made me think about that. If we have an unlimited supply of energy and we have teleporters, well, why can't you harvest a field with a teleporter? You just have a grid out there that tells the computers know what to look for, and they pick all the tomatoes, and all the tomatoes are now transferred to a matter integrator machine that's going to convert them into a block of protein of some sort, vegetation-based whatever, that's now going to be fed into replicators all over the place. So, it just makes me wonder a little bit. So the majority, what we're saying here is that the majority of humanity has a leisure opportunity. It has an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to do anything useful. I imagine that there's some peer pressure and some social pressures that motivate majority of people to find some kind of niche to be productive and useful in. Like I said, when I looked at the video or the movies, the TV series of DS9, when Ben Sisko and his son go back to Earth to visit his dad at the family restaurant, my thought was, okay, well, we have a restaurant, but they don't really need to work. They don't really need to have that restaurant, other than the fact that people want to eat, people want to be social, people want to go to a restaurant. And yet, I know from my business doing what I do that I have met quite a few restaurateurs who love what they do. And if we were in a cashless society where it wasn't, the need for money wasn't a major thing, they would still open and run restaurants because they love what they do. They love to cook. They love to present appetizing meals to strangers and to friends and family. And that's how this sort of thing would keep on moving, I think. It's a interesting concept of worth some thought. Anyway, so when we look at General Order 3, the gist here is that it's important for this diverse entity known as the Starfleet, with all these variety, because you always see different aliens, you see different races serving in Starfleet in various capacities. So these people have come from different cultures and backgrounds and ideologies than the humans have, and it's up to everybody to learn to accept and to moderate. So if you have some people with some serious absolutes, think how difficult it's been for Worf. Even though he's raised in the Federation, his natural tendencies are still Klingon, and he longs to be a Klingon, a pure serve the Empire, and yet he's also a son of the Federation. So he's always in turmoil inside. He's always needing to remind himself of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I imagine that this is one of the reasons he always looks so, I don't know, standoffish. He doesn't want to offend unintentionally, and to remember 185 different philosophies on how greetings should be done based on the various member planets is a rough and tough thing. It's difficult. So I imagine he doesn't go to a lot of these foreign worlds, if you will, even though they're member states of the Federation. Having that General Order 3 makes sure that members of the Federation who join Starfleet understand that they're going to be upheld to a number of different ideologies and standards, that they're going to have to become adaptive and empathetic of the various cultures that they encounter. And this is probably a good thing, a much better thing than what we're giving some thought and credit to, because these very people are going to be the quote and unquote ambassadors of the Federation beyond Federation space, or to those non-aligned areas and regions within the Federation claimed territories that have yet to become member states, because there are a certain amount of worlds and systems that chose not to belong to the Federation but are now engulfed in the Federation territory. So rather, indirectly they become protectorates of Starfleet, because Starfleet has mandates. It has general orders that dictate that they're supposed to protect and defend Federation territory, Federation resources, Federation people, and indirectly they're included in that to a limit. So we don't enter their system and tell them and dictate what they can and can't do. And I imagine the Starfleet would not openly enter into a quote neutral system, even if that system's under attack by pirates or some other entity, without their requesting it, without their permission. Otherwise, doing so potentially violates a number of the general orders. So that captain better be very astute at his, better lawyer up, I guess, is a good thing a good way of putting it. All right. So there you have it, General Order 3.